What happens when the perfect life is built on the perfect lie? For 20 years, Eleanor Sterling lived a fairy tale. Her husband Richard, a Wall Street titan, gave her everything: a penthouse overlooking Central Park, a life of charity galas, and a love she thought was unshakable. But a single misplaced document would shatter it all. It led her to a $40 million family mansion she never knew existed, a gilded cage Richard had secretly prepared for another woman. He thought he had planned for everything, covered every track. But he never planned for his wife. And he never could have imagined the centuries-old secret she held, a secret tied to the very foundation of that house that would not only expose his betrayal, but utterly destroy him. The silence in their Manhattan penthouse was a specific kind of quiet. It wasn't peaceful. It was expensive. It was the sound of triple-paned glass muting the roar of New York City, 28 floors below the whisper-soft hum of a climate control system, and the heavy sound-absorbing pile of a silk rug that cost more than a family car. For Eleanor Sterling, this silence had once felt like a sanctuary. Now, it felt like a tomb. She sat at the polished mahogany desk in their shared home office, the late afternoon sun casting long, distorted shadows across the room. Richard wouldn't be home for hours. He never was anymore. His work as a managing partner at the private equity firm, Sterling and Finch, had become all-consuming. That's what he told her anyway. His excuses were always plausible, layered with jargon about leveraged buyouts and hostile takeovers. That she was meant to nod and smile at feigning understanding. For 2 decades, she had played her part perfectly. Eleanor wasn't born into this world of staggering wealth. She'd met Richard in a university library, where she was a bright, ambitious history major with a scholarship, and he was the charming heir to a modest fortune he would soon multiply 100-fold. He'd been captivated by her intellect and her quiet grace. She, in turn, had been swept away by his ambition and the fierce, protective way he loved her. She put her plans for a PhD in archival studies on hold to support his meteoric rise, becoming the perfect corporate wife, elegant, discreet, and an impeccable hostess. But the man who now came home late, smelling of expensive scotch and a faint floral perfume that wasn't hers, was a stranger. The distance between them had grown from a crack to a chasm. It started with small things. A new password-protected laptop he claimed was for firm security protocols. Business trips to San Francisco or London that didn't appear on the company's public travel logs. And the credit card statements. That's what she was looking at now, not the main household account. He wasn't that clumsy, but the statements for a private investment account. She had access to one they'd set up for tax purposes years ago and had largely forgotten. Richard used it for discreet ventures, he'd said. As she scrolled through the PDF on her screen, a pattern emerged. Monthly payments, always the same amount, $75,000 to a holding company she'd never heard of, Blackwood Properties LLC. Then there were other charges more erratic but equally baffling. Thousands to a high-end interior designer, Charlotte Mayhew, whose minimalist chic style was the antithesis of their own classically decorated home. Charges from antique dealers in upstate New York. A bill for over $200,000 from a landscape architecture firm in Greenwich, Connecticut. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't a discreet venture. This was a project. A massive, expensive project he was hiding from her. Her first thought, a desperate, hopeful one, was that it was a surprise. Their 20th anniversary was in 6 months. Maybe he was building her a dream country home, a grand gesture to rekindle the dying embers of their marriage. She clung to that thought, a drowning woman reaching for a piece of driftwood. It was so much better than the alternative that was already taking root in her mind, a cold, thorny weed of suspicion. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place that evening. Richard came home just before midnight. His tie loosened a weary but satisfied look on his face. He kissed her cheek, a perfunctory gesture that held no warmth. "Long day, honey," he mumbled, heading for the bar. Closed the acquisition of that biotech firm. It was a monster. "Congratulations, Richard. That's wonderful," she said, her voice even practiced. Later, as he slept, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. He'd forgotten to put it on silent. Eleanor's eyes snapped open. She never touched his phone. It was an unspoken rule, a boundary of privacy she had always respected. But tonight, respect felt like a fool's luxury. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. It was locked, of course, but the notification was visible on the screen. A text message, not from a colleague or a client. The name was simply Isabella. The message read, "The gardenias are perfect. The whole place smells like us. Can't wait for you to be home again. Forever." Gardenias, a landscape architect in Greenwich, a holding company named Blackwood. The driftwood of hope splintered and sank, leaving Eleanor Sterling alone in the cold, dark water of the truth. He wasn't building a home for her. He was building a life with someone else. The silence of the penthouse was no longer just expensive. It was suffocating. It was the sound of her world, so carefully constructed, beginning to crumble. And in the ruins, a new, unfamiliar resolve began to form. She was no longer just a wife. She was a historian, an archivist, and she would dig up every last secret, no matter how deep he had buried it. The next morning, Eleanor moved with a chilling calm that surprised even herself. The hysteria she'd felt clawing at her throat in the dead of night had solidified into something cold and hard. Grief would come later. Now was the time for facts. While Richard was in the shower, she slipped back into the office. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, her mind sharp and focused, channeling the skills she'd honed in the university archives years ago. She was no longer searching for clues. She was conducting an investigation. Blackwood Properties, LLC. A quick search of the New York State corporate database revealed it was a shell company registered just over a year ago. The registered agent was a law firm known for handling discrete transactions for the ultra-wealthy Parker Sloan and Jennings. Richard's personal lawyer, Arthur Finch, no relation to his business partner, was a senior partner there. The connection was direct and damning. The real breakthrough came when she cross-referenced the LLC with Connecticut property records. There it was, a single property listed under the LLC's ownership in the most exclusive old money corner of Greenwich. The address was 407 Sterling Ridge Road, the name of the estate Blackwood Manor. A jolt went through her. Sterling Ridge Road. It was a coincidence, surely, but a cruel one. She pulled up the real estate listing from the previous year. The property had been sold for $38 million in a private off-market deal. The listing photos were breathtaking. A sprawling stone and timber manor from the Gilded Age, set on 50 acres of rolling hills and ancient woodland. It was magnificent, historic, and possessed a quiet, understated grandeur that felt a world away from the sterile glass towers Richard inhabited on Wall Street. The description called it a legacy estate held within the Sterling Van Owen family for over a century. Her breath caught. Richard's family name was Sterling, but they were new money, his grandfather having made a fortune in manufacturing after the war. They had no legacy estates, no century-old family ties to Greenwich. He must have relished the irony, buying a piece of history and prestige that wasn't his own. Now for the other name. Isabella. a name so simple it was almost untraceable. But she had a clue, the text message. "The gardenias are perfect." It suggested an artistic, romantic sensibility. Richard had recently become a major patron of the contemporary art scene, a movie she'd assumed was for business networking. He'd been spending a lot of time at a trendy Soho gallery called Gallery Rossi. Eleanor's blood ran cold. She typed the gallery's name into her browser. The About Us page loaded. And there she was, the owner and head curator, Isabella Rossi. A woman perhaps 15 years younger than Eleanor, with flowing dark hair, impossibly high cheekbones, and intelligent, hungry eyes. Her bio was impressive, a graduate of the Sorbonne, a rising star in the art world, known for her bold taste and her ability to charm wealthy collectors. The gallery's Instagram page was a curated glimpse into Isabella's world. Photos of her at Art Basel in Miami, at gallery openings with champagne flute in hand and posing beside sculptures and paintings. As Eleanor scrolled back through the months, her stomach twisted. There in the background of a photo from a charity auction 6 months ago was Richard. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at Isabella, and the expression on his face was one of open, unguarded adoration, an expression Eleanor hadn't seen directed at her in years. Every transaction, every lie, every late night suddenly clicked into place. The interior designer Charlotte Mayhew was known for curating spaces for art collectors. The antique dealers specialized in the arts and crafts movement, a period Isabella had written her thesis on. Blackwood Manor wasn't just a house, it was a custom-built shrine to his mistress. The $75,000 monthly payments to the LLC were likely for the mortgage and upkeep. He was funding Isabella's entire life, her gallery, her home, her world. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, the screen blurring through a film of tears she refused to let fall. The betrayal was so much more profound than a simple tawdry affair. It was a parallel life meticulously planned and lavishly funded. He hadn't just cheated on her. He had effectively replaced her. He had created a new life with a new woman in a historic mansion while leaving Eleanor to curate the silent museum of their dead marriage. She saved every file, every screenshot, every statement to a secure encrypted drive. This was her evidence, her archive of deceit. As she heard the shower turn off down the hall, she closed the laptop, her expression hardening into a mask of serene neutrality. Richard emerged dressed in a crisp, bespoke suit, looking every bit the master of the universe. "Morning, Ellie," he said, adjusting his watch. "I'll be late tonight. We're entertaining the Japanese delegation." "Of course, dear," she replied, her voice smooth as glass. "Work hard. I'll be here." As he walked out the door, she allowed herself a small, bitter smile. "I'll be here," she thought. "But I won't be waiting." Her PhD may have been abandoned, but her mind was not. She was a historian, and she was about to excavate her husband's life down to the bedrock. And she had a feeling that the secrets buried at Blackwood Manor went deeper than just infidelity. 2 weeks passed in a state of surreal calm. Eleanor operated on a kind of controlled autopilot, every interaction with Richard a carefully rehearsed performance. She was the loving, slightly distracted wife, and he was the powerful, preoccupied husband. Their life continued its charade, a ballet of polite inquiries and practiced smiles, all while Eleanor was secretly amassing an arsenal of information. She hired a private investigator, a discreet ex-NYPD detective named Frank Miller, not to prove the affair she already knew, but to document its scale. Miller's reports were clinical and devastating. Photos of Richard and Isabella entering Blackwood Manor together, hand in hand. Receipts from romantic dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants. A flight manifest for a weekend trip to St. Bart's on a private jet. The evidence was overwhelming, a mountain of deceit that grew larger with each passing day. Eleanor knew a simple confrontation would be a mistake. Richard was a master manipulator, a man who could twist reality and make you doubt your own sanity. He would lie, deny, and gaslight her until she felt like a hysterical, paranoid fool. She needed leverage. She needed something he couldn't talk his way out of. So she decided to set a trap using the very tools of their high society life against him. "Richard, darling," she began one evening as they sat down for a rare dinner at home. "The annual fundraiser for the Children's Literacy Foundation is in 3 weeks. As co-chair, I was thinking, why don't we host the patrons' pre-gala dinner this year, here at the penthouse?" He looked up from his plate, surprised. "Here? That's a lot of work, Ellie. Are you sure you're up for it?" The question was laced with a subtle condescension she now saw so clearly. "The implication, you, my dear, delicate wife. I think it would be a wonderful gesture." She pressed on her voice, light and breezy. "And I have a special idea. This year's theme is art and literature. I thought it would be a brilliant touch to have a guest curator speak to talk about the intersection of the two. I was reading about a very talented young woman, downtown Isabella Rossi. Her gallery is doing fascinating work. Do you know of her?" She watched his face. For a split second, a flicker of panic crossed his eyes, so fleeting she might have missed it if she hadn't been looking for it. But he recovered instantly. His expression smoothed over into one of mild interest. "Rossi," he mused, taking a sip of wine. "The name sounds vaguely familiar. I think Finch mentioned her. Smart move, Ellie. Shows we're in touch with the downtown scene. Yes, book her. It's a fine idea." The ease with which he lied was breathtaking. He had agreed to bring his mistress into their home to stand beside Eleanor and welcome her as a guest speaker at their own party. He was either supremely arrogant or he believed her to be a complete and utter fool. Eleanor suspected it was a bit of both. The night of the pre-gala dinner arrived. The penthouse was transformed. Waitstaff moved silently with trays of champagne and canapes. The low hum of conversation from New York's elite bankers, philanthropists, and art collectors filled the air. Eleanor was a vision in a sapphire blue gown, her smile warm, her demeanor flawless. She greeted guests, laughed at anecdotes, and played the part of the perfect hostess. Then Isabella arrived. She was stunning in a black avant-garde dress, her dark hair swept up, showcasing a pair of diamond earrings Eleanor recognized from a charge on Richard's private account. Richard, ever the professional, greeted her with a formal handshake, a masterclass in feigned distance. "Rossi, a pleasure to have you. My wife, Eleanor, has been so looking forward to your talk." Isabella turned to Eleanor, her smile dazzling. "Mrs. Sterling, thank you so much for this opportunity. Your home is absolutely beautiful." "The pleasure is all ours, Isabella." Eleanor said, her voice like honey. She took Isabella's hand, her grip firm. "Richard has told me so little about you." For the first time, Isabella's poise faltered. A hint of confusion clouded her eyes. Before she could respond, Eleanor guided her towards the crowd. The moment of confrontation came later. Eleanor had planned it with surgical precision. After Isabella's talk, a brilliant and engaging speech on patronage in the arts, Eleanor drew Richard into the quiet of his library, away from the prying eyes and ears of their guests. "She's wonderful, isn't she?" Eleanor began her back to him as she straightened a book on a shelf. "Who?" Richard asked, his guard up. "Isabella. So poised, so passionate. You have excellent taste." He was silent. The air grew thick with unspoken words. "Richard," she said, finally turning to face him, her expression a mask of manufactured concern. "I found something the other day. Some property documents for a place called Blackwood Manor, in Greenwich." His face went pale. It's a surprise," he stammered, falling back on the lie she had predicted. "For our anniversary. A country home. I've been restoring it for us." This was the moment, the gaslighting she had been waiting for. She let out a soft, sympathetic laugh. "Oh, Richard, a surprise for me. That is so thoughtful. But darling, why would you hire Charlotte Mayhew? You know I despise her work. And why are there invoices for a collection of arts and crafts furniture and gardenias planted everywhere? I'm allergic, remember." Each question was a clinical strike dismantling his lie piece by piece. His composure began to crack. "You've been snooping, Eleanor." His voice was low, menacing. "I've been paying attention," she corrected him calmly. "To my husband, to my marriage. So tell me, Richard, is Isabella part of the surprise too? Is she helping you decorate my anniversary gift? Or is the entire $40 million estate the gift? And is she the recipient?" The blood drained from his face. He was cornered, stripped of his lies, and he reacted with rage. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he hissed. "You live in this gilded cage I built for you, enjoying my money, and this is the thanks I get. You dare to question me?" "I dare," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, yet carrying more weight than his shouts. "I dare, because you brought your mistress into my home tonight. You stood next to me and lied to my face. You are building a life on my back with my time and with the assumption of my ignorance. You think Blackwood Manor is your secret. You think it's your sanctuary." She took a step closer, her eyes locking onto his. "But I have a secret too, Richard. One you never thought to look for. That house is not what you think it is. And your perfect plan has a fatal flaw you are about to discover." She turned and walked out of the library, leaving him standing amidst his leather-bound books and expensive lies, a tremor of genuine fear finally breaking through his armor of arrogance. The party was still in full swing, but for Richard Sterling, the celebration was over. The day after the party was heavy with a toxic silence. Richard left before Eleanor woke up, a cowardly retreat. He didn't call or text. He was letting her stew, likely hoping she would break, that her anger would dissolve into tears and recriminations, a language he understood and knew how to dismiss. But Eleanor had no tears left. She had only a cold, clear purpose. She had to see it. She had to stand on the grounds of the life he had built behind her back. It wasn't just about confirming the affair anymore. It was about understanding the scale of her own erasure. She rented a nondescript sedan paid for in cash and drove the hour and a half from Manhattan to Greenwich. The city's steel and glass gave way to the lush, manicured green of Connecticut. When she turned onto Sterling Ridge Road, her breath hitched. It was a winding country lane, shaded by a canopy of ancient oaks and maples, flanked by stone walls and the discreet entrances to colossal estates. The entrance to Blackwood Manor was understated 2 simple stone pillars with a black iron gate. It was open. He was arrogant enough not to worry about security, or perhaps Isabella was expecting him. Eleanor parked the car down the road, hidden by a curve, and walked the rest of the way. Her heart pounded as she stepped onto the gravel driveway. The house stood at the end of a long, curving approach, and it was even more beautiful than the pictures had suggested. It wasn't a gaudy McMansion. It was a work of art. Built of dark, weathered stone and rich mahogany timbers, it seemed to grow organically from the landscape. It exuded a sense of history, of permanence. It looked like a home that had seen generations come and go. The new landscaping was immaculate. The gardenias Richard's mistress loved were planted in huge white clusters near the front entrance, their scent heavy in the air. She didn't approach the front door. Instead, she circled the house, keeping to the edge of the woods that bordered the sprawling lawn. It felt like trespassing on her own life. Through the large mullioned windows of the great room, she could see the interior. Charlotte Mayhew's design was masterful, Eleanor had to admit. It was a seamless blend of modern minimalism and the house's historic character. A massive abstract painting one Eleanor recognized from Isabella's gallery hung over a cavernous fireplace. Everything was perfect, curated, and utterly devoid of Eleanor's own taste or presence. It was Isabella's world. As she moved toward the back of the house, she saw her. Isabella was on a stone terrace, a laptop open in front of her, a cup of coffee steaming at her elbow. She was wearing simple linen trousers and a cashmere sweater, looking completely at home. She looked serene, productive, the mistress of the manor. The sight was a physical blow, knocking the air from Eleanor's lungs. This wasn't a fling. This was a replacement. Eleanor ducked behind a massive copper beech tree, her mind reeling. She should leave. She had seen enough. But something held her there. It was the house itself. It felt familiar. It was a strange, nonsensical feeling, a whisper of déjà vu she couldn't place. Her eyes scanned the architecture, the specific pattern of the stonework, the unique carving on the timber eaves. And then she saw it. Set into the stone of the main chimney stack high above the terrace was a small carved crest. It was weathered and partially covered in ivy, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it. It was a shield bisected by a diagonal line with the image of a hawk in the upper portion and a single 5-petaled rose in the lower. Eleanor froze. Her blood turned to ice in her veins. She knew that crest. It wasn't from a history book. It was from her own. It was the crest of her maternal grandmother's family, the Devereuxs. Her grandmother, who had passed away when Eleanor was a teenager, used to tell her stories of the family's lost inheritance. A grand house in the country, built by a formidable great-great-grandmother, Genevieve Devereux, a woman who had married into a junior branch of the Sterling family in the late 19th century. A house that was lost to the family during the Great Depression, through some sort of swindle or forced sale. The stories were vague, tinged with the sadness of lost fortune, and Eleanor had always dismissed them as romanticized family lore. But there was the crest, carved in stone. Her mind raced, connecting disparate, long-forgotten fragments of information. The name of the estate in the old listing, held within the Sterling Van Owen family for over a century. Her great-great-grandmother, Genevieve Devereux, had married a Sterling. The road Sterling Ridge Road. Richard, with his own Sterling name, must have seen the listing and assumed it was some distant, forgotten branch of his own family. A delightful irony he could purchase. He would have never in a million years made the connection to her family, the Devereuxs, a name he barely knew, a family whose history he'd never shown the slightest interest in. Suddenly, the house wasn't just a symbol of his betrayal. It was something more. It was a ghost from her own past. He hadn't just bought a house for his mistress. In his careless, arrogant ignorance, he had stolen her birthright to do it. A new ferocious energy surged through her. This was no longer just about infidelity. This was about legacy, about history. It was about reclaiming something that had been stolen once from her family a century ago, and now again by her own husband. She backed away slowly, her eyes still fixed on the crest. She had to get to her family's records. The old letters, the diaries, the documents her grandmother had kept packed away in dusty trunks in the attic of her childhood home. She had dismissed it all as sentimental nonsense. Now she realized it might hold the key to everything. Richard thought he was the king of this castle. He had no idea he was just a temporary tenant. And Eleanor was about to find the original deed. Eleanor drove from Greenwich, not back to Manhattan, but 2 hours west to the quiet, leafy town in Pennsylvania where she had grown up. The house, a modest Victorian, had been empty since her mother passed away 5 years prior. Eleanor had kept it unable to part with the last tangible piece of her past, paying the taxes and a caretaker to maintain the grounds. Richard had always found it a nuisance, a sentimental drain on resources. Now it was her sanctuary and her archive. The attic was just as she remembered, hot, stuffy, and smelling of cedar and thyme. Sunlight streamed through a single dusty dormer window, illuminating dancing dust motes. In the corner sat 3 large leather-bound steamer trunks, embossed with the initials GDS, Genevieve Devereux Sterling, her great-great-grandmother. For 2 days, Eleanor lost herself in the past. She worked methodically, her archivist training kicking in. She put on a pair of white cotton gloves and carefully lifted out bundles of letters tied with faded silk ribbons, leather-bound diaries, and folders of brittle, yellowed documents. It was a treasure trove of a forgotten life. She learned of Genevieve, a woman far ahead of her time. Born to a wealthy shipping family, she was fiercely intelligent and independent. She had married Theron Sterling, a man described in her diaries as having a poet's heart but a fool's grasp of finance. It was Genevieve's inheritance, not Theron Sterling family money, that had built Blackwood Manor in 1895. She had designed it herself, alongside the architect, as a sanctuary for her family, a place of art and nature. The story of how the house was lost was more tragic than she'd imagined. After Theron's death, Genevieve's son Eleanor's great-grandfather had fallen prey to a charismatic con man during the Depression, signing away control of the estate in a fraudulent investment scheme. The family was forced out, left with nothing but their personal belongings. The shame was so great that they rarely spoke of it, the story softening into myth over the generations. Eleanor cross-referenced the names and dates with online historical databases and county records she could access remotely. Everything lined up. The Sterling family who sold the house to Richards LLC was indeed descended from that junior branch, but the ownership history between the 1930s and their acquisition was murky, involving a series of questionable transfers. But the real discovery, the one that made Eleanor's heart stop, was not in a diary or a letter. It was tucked into a false bottom of the largest trunk, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with twine. It was a thick vellum document, the ink faded, but still legible, covered in elegant looping script. The seal of a 19th-century law firm was still intact at the bottom. The heading read, "The Blackwood Manor Matriarchal Covenant." It wasn't a standard deed. It was a unique legal instrument drafted by Genevieve herself with a progressive law firm in 1894, just before her marriage, in an era when women's property rights were tenuous at best. Genevieve had created a covenant designed to protect the house from the financial follies of the men in her family. The covenant stated in dense but unambiguous legal language that while the management of the estate could be entrusted to her husband and his male heirs, the ultimate title to Blackwood Manor was to be held in perpetuity for the eldest living female descendant of her bloodline. The title could only be transferred upon the death of that descendant, at which point it would pass to the next in line. It explicitly stated that no sale or transfer of the property by any male heir or trustee would be considered valid without the signed witnessed consent of the designated female title holder. It was an ironclad, unassailable, and deeply feminist document for its time. According to the family tree she had painstakingly pieced together, the last designated title holder was her own grandmother, who had passed away 20 years ago. Upon her death, the title, unbeknownst to anyone, had automatically passed to the next eldest female descendant, her daughter Eleanor's mother. And when Eleanor's mother had died 5 years ago, the title had passed to her. Eleanor Sterling. The woman who thought she had nothing was the rightful legal owner of Blackwood Manor. The documents Richard's high-priced lawyers had executed were worthless. The $38 million sale was a fraud. The family who sold it to him had no legal right to do so. They had possessed a deed of management, perhaps, but not the core title, which had lain dormant and undiscovered like a sleeping dragon for nearly a century. Richard hadn't bought a house. He had bought a lawsuit. Eleanor sank back on her heels, the vellum cool against her trembling hands. The sheer poetic justice of it was staggering. Richard, the titan of finance, the man who prided himself on his due diligence, had made the sloppiest, most arrogant purchase of his life. He was so blinded by the Sterling name and the allure of old money that he and his lawyers had failed to dig deep enough. They had traced the patriarchal line of ownership, never once considering the possibility of a matriarchal one. He had built a monument to his own ego and his mistress on land that legally belonged to the wife he so casually disregarded. She spent the next week with a probate and property law specialist, a shrewd, silver-haired man named Alistair Davies, who her father had used years ago. Davies was astounded. He pored over the covenant, authenticated the signatures and seals, and confirmed the unbroken chain of inheritance. "It's magnificent," Davies said, his eyes gleaming with professional excitement. "A legal masterpiece. In my 40 years of practice, I've never seen anything like it. Mrs. Sterling, this document is irrefutable. Blackwood Manor is and has been, for the past 5 years, unequivocally yours." Eleanor felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. It wasn't about the money or the property. It was about the voice of Genevieve Devereux Sterling reaching across a century to right a wrong. Her great-great-grandmother hadn't just built a house. She had built a fortress to protect her descendants. And now Eleanor was ready to use it. She didn't want to just win. She wanted to obliterate him. She wanted to do it on her terms, on a stage of his own making, where the humiliation would be absolute and the victory undeniable. And she knew just the occasion to do it. Richard Sterling was at the apex of his world. He was hosting the annual Sterling and Finch Foundation Gala, the philanthropic event of the season held this year at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The grand hall was filled with the city's power brokers, their wives draped in jewels, the air buzzing with talk of billion-dollar deals and 7-figure donations. For Richard, this was not charity. It was a demonstration of power. He had managed the situation with Eleanor with what he considered masterful skill. After their confrontation, he had retreated into a strategy of cold professional courtesy. He treated her not as a wife to be placated, but as a business problem to be managed. He assumed her threat about a secret was just an emotional outburst, the desperate gambit of a woman with no cards to play. He was confident that in the end she would fold. The alternative, a messy public divorce, would be too humiliating for her, too damaging to the comfortable life he provided. He vastly underestimated her. Isabella Rossi was also in attendance. Not as Richard's date, that would be too obvious, but as a respected member of the arts community. She was the curator of a special exhibition the Foundation was sponsoring, a role that gave her a legitimate, unassailable reason to be there. She and Richard exchanged subtle, knowing glances across the crowded room, partners in a secret that made them feel invincible. Eleanor arrived late. She made her entrance not with a dramatic flourish, but with a quiet, unnerving grace. She wore a simple, elegant gown of deep crimson, a color of power and war. She wasn't wearing the opulent diamonds Richard had bought her. Instead, around her neck was a simple antique locket that had belonged to Genevieve Devereux Sterling. On her arm was not her husband, but her lawyer, Mr. Alistair Davies, who looked unassuming in his tailored suit, a leather portfolio held firmly in his hand. Richard saw her enter and felt a pang of annoyance. Her bringing a lawyer to his gala was a passive-aggressive move, and a tacky one at that. He intercepted them near the grand staircase. "Eleanor," he said, his voice a low growl. "What is this? What is he doing here?" "Mr. Davies is my guest, Richard," she replied, her voice calm and level. "Please don't make a scene." "I'm not the one making a scene. You're parading a lawyer around my event." "I think you'll find," Mr. Davies interjected smoothly, "that my presence is entirely necessary. We have a matter of some urgency to discuss with you." "Whatever it is, it can wait until tomorrow," Richard snapped, turning to walk away. "It's about Blackwood Manor," Eleanor said, stopping him in his tracks. "And it cannot wait." The climax came, as Eleanor had planned during Richard's keynote address. He stood at a podium on a raised stage, bathed in a spotlight, speaking eloquently about legacy heritage and building for the future. He was in his element, powerful, charming, and utterly fraudulent. As he reached his closing remarks, Eleanor and Mr. Davies approached the stage from the side. A security guard moved to intercept them, but Eleanor simply said, "I'm Mrs. Sterling," and he hesitated, confused. That hesitation was all they needed. They walked to the edge of the stage, just out of the main spotlight, but clearly visible to the entire audience. The crowd began to murmur, sensing an unscheduled interruption. Richard's flow faltered. He shot Eleanor a look of pure fury. "Eleanor, what in God's name are you doing?" he whispered harshly, his microphone carrying the sibilant sounds to the front rows. Mr. Davies stepped forward and placed his leather portfolio on the podium. He opened it and produced 2 documents. "Richard Sterling," Davies announced, his voice, clear and resonant, carrying through the now silent hall. "I am Alistair Davies, counsel for Mrs. Eleanor Devereux Sterling. I am here tonight to serve you with 2 legal notices." He slid the first one in front of Richard. "The first is a petition for the dissolution of marriage on the grounds of adultery." A collective gasp went through the audience. Isabella Rossi, standing near the front, went white as a sheet. "The second," Davies continued, his timing impeccable, "is a cease and desist order and an action to quiet title demanding that you and your associate, Ms. Isabella Rossi, immediately vacate the property known as Blackwood Manor." Richard laughed a harsh, incredulous sound. "Vacate my own property?" "You're insane. I have the deed. I have the best lawyers in New York. That house is mine." This was Eleanor's cue. She stepped forward, taking a secondary microphone from the podium. Her voice did not tremble. It was as solid and unyielding as the stone of her ancestors' home. "No, Richard. You have a worthless piece of paper, she said, her eyes locked on his. The entire room was hanging on her every word. You thought you bought a legacy estate from a distant branch of your family. You were so enamored with the Sterling name, you failed to do your research. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. That house was never a Sterling house. It was built in 1895 with the fortune of my great-great-grandmother, Genevieve Devereux Sterling. It was Devereux land and Devereux money. And before she died, she placed the house under a legal covenant, a matriarchal covenant. The title could only pass to the eldest female heir of her bloodline. It could never be sold by a man. She looked out at the sea of shocked faces, then let her gaze fall on Isabella, who looked as if she might faint. That title passed from my great-great-grandmother to my grandmother, to my mother. And 5 years ago, it passed to me. You didn't buy a house for your mistress, Richard. You trespassed on my inheritance. You decorated my home. You slept with your mistress in my bed. She turned back to her stunned husband. So this is not a request. As the sole legal and undisputed owner of Blackwood Manor, I'm telling you to get out of my house. Both of you. The silence in the hall was absolute. Then a single smartphone flash went off. Then another. Richard Sterling, master of the universe, stood there exposed and humiliated on the stage he had built for himself. His empire, his reputation, and his carefully constructed world had been demolished in under 3 minutes by the quiet, unassuming wife he had so foolishly underestimated. The silence that followed Eleanor's declaration in the grand hall of the Metropolitan Museum was a living entity. It was a vacuum sucking the air and sound out of the room, leaving only the thunderous pounding in Richard Sterling's ears. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, the 200 most powerful people in New York City were frozen, a tableau of shock and disbelief. Then the spell shattered. A single camera flash from a society reporter's phone ignited a firestorm. The low murmur erupted into a roar of overlapping voices, the rustle of silk and the clinking of glasses forgotten, as everyone surged forward, their phones held aloft. Richard stood paralyzed, the spotlight that had been his ally, now feeling like an interrogation lamp. His face, usually a mask of confident command, was a canvas of ashen horror. Beside him, Mr. Davies calmly placed the legal documents on the lectern, the crisp white paper, a stark contrast to the dark wood, like a tombstone marking the death of Richard's reputation. Eleanor didn't spare her husband another glance. Her objective was complete. Taking Mr. Davies's arm, she descended the side stage steps and walked, not ran through the parting sea of onlookers. Her back was straight, her head held high, and her expression was one of serene, unassailable finality. The retreat of the vanquished was far less dignified. Richard stumbled from the stage, his security detail clearing a path through the frenzied reporters shouting questions. "Mr. Sterling, is it true? Who is Genevieve Devereux? Did you know the house wasn't yours?" He shoved his way through the crowd, his eyes wildly searching for Isabella. He saw her near the exit, her face a ghostly white, being swarmed by the same piranhas of the press. Their eyes met for a fleeting second, not in solidarity, but in mutual, panicked accusation. Then she was gone, swallowed by the night, a phantom who had haunted his marriage, and now would haunt his ruin. The ensuing legal battle was not the swift surrender Eleanor had anticipated, but a brutal, drawn-out war of attrition. Richard, a cornered animal, threw the full force of his remaining fortune into the fight. His lawyers, a ruthless team from a top-tier litigation firm, assaulted the matriarchal covenant from every conceivable angle. They argued it was an anachronistic relic, a form of gender-based discrimination that was unenforceable in the 21st century. They claimed it was an unreasonable restraint on alienation, a legal principle that discourages restrictions on selling property. They filed motion after motion, burying Eleanor and Mr. Davies in a blizzard of paperwork designed to drain her resources and her resolve. But Richard had fundamentally misunderstood the woman he had been married to for 20 years. He thought her quietness was weakness. He now discovered it was patience. He thought her scholarly pursuits were a quaint hobby. He now found they had forged a mind of formidable, analytical steel. Eleanor became the co-architect of her own legal defense. She spent her days not in spas or boutiques, but in law libraries and historical archives, working alongside Mr. Davies's team. She unearthed legal precedents from the 19th century, supporting the validity of such unique inheritance trusts. She found letters from Genevieve's own lawyers, discussing their intent, providing a powerful, century-old corroboration of the covenant's purpose. She was not merely a plaintiff, she was the lead researcher on her own case. The media circus was relentless. The tabloids had a field day with lurid headlines, "Mansion Mistress and a Matriarch," and "Sterling's folly wife holds 100-year-old deed." More serious publications like the Wall Street Journal ran in-depth pieces on the staggering lapse in due diligence, questioning how a man entrusted with billions of dollars of investor capital could make such a catastrophic personal error. The board of Sterling and Finch, already reeling from the public humiliation, saw their stock price dip. The morality clause in Richard's contract was their only way out. He was unceremoniously ousted, his name chiseled off the marble lobby wall, his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale told in business schools. His social exile was just as swift. The invitations stopped. The calls went unreturned. Friends who had once clamored for his stock tips now crossed the street to avoid him. He was a pariah, a living symbol of arrogance and failure. The sprawling penthouse, once a monument to his success, became a luxurious prison. The expensive silence he had once curated now mocked him, amplifying his isolation. Isabella Rossi was erased from the landscape. Faced with a lawsuit naming her as a co-occupant of a fraudulently obtained property and abandoned by Richard, she shuttered her gallery overnight. She settled with Eleanor out of court for a nominal sum, signing a stringent non-disclosure agreement. She sold her art collection, packed her bags, and disappeared back to Europe, her meteoric rise in the New York art world ending in a spectacular flameout. She had been the beautiful, cultured alternative to the quiet wife. In the end, she was just collateral damage in a war whose origins she never understood. 3 months into the legal fight, the judge presiding over the case threw out Richard's final appeal, ruling that the covenant was a legally sound and binding document. The victory was total. Richard was ordered to vacate the premises within 30 days and in a final crushing humiliation pay for the restoration of any architectural details his designer had altered. Eleanor waited until the 30th day. She drove up to Greenwich alone in her own car. The black iron gates were closed. She used a simple, old-fashioned iron key, a key she had found in Genevieve's trunk, which fit the lock perfectly. As the gates swung open, she felt not a surge of triumph, but a profound sense of homecoming. Walking through the front door of Blackwood Manor was a surreal experience. The house was empty of life, but filled with the ghosts of the past year. Isabella's minimalist furniture and abstract art were gone, carted away by movers. All that remained were the bare, beautiful bones of the house and the lingering faint scent of gardenias, a perfume of betrayal she was determined to eradicate. She walked through the cavernous rooms, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. She ran her hand along the carved mahogany staircase and looked up at the timbered ceilings. This was Genevieve's vision. This was her birthright. Her work began the next day. It was not a redecoration. It was a reclamation. She hired historic restoration experts to carefully remove the modern light fixtures and sterile white paint, uncovering original plasterwork and stenciling. She brought the furniture, the portraits, and the books from her family's attic, each piece settling into the house as if it had been waiting for a century to return. A portrait of the fiery-eyed Genevieve Devereux Sterling was hung over the great room fireplace, displacing the memory of the abstract canvas Isabella had chosen. With her victory secure and her home reclaimed, Eleanor found a new purpose. She sold the Manhattan penthouse and poured the proceeds, along with a significant portion of her divorce settlement, into creating the Devereux Sterling Foundation for Historical Preservation. Its mission was precise: to identify, purchase, and preserve historic properties of significance to women's history places whose stories had been overlooked by a history written by men. Blackwood Manor would be its headquarters, a living example of its cause. A year after that fateful night at the Met, Eleanor hosted an event at the manor. It wasn't a gala. It was a symposium. The guests were not bankers and socialites, but historians, architects, academics, and young female students. They gathered on the great lawn, not to drink champagne and network, but to discuss the preservation of heritage and the power of forgotten narratives. That evening, as the last of her guests departed, Eleanor stood on the stone terrace, a glass of wine in her hand. The air was crisp and smelled of damp earth and the hardy English roses she had planted in place of the gardenias. The house was filled with a warm, gentle light, its windows glowing like embers. She was no longer Mrs. Richard Sterling, a beautiful accessory, locked in a gilded cage. She was Eleanor Devereux Sterling, the rightful mistress of this manor, the steward of a legacy. Later in the library, she opened Genevieve's diary to a passage she had bookmarked. "This house is not merely stone and timber," Genevieve had written. "It is a statement. It is a promise to my daughters and their daughters that they will have a place in this world that is unequivocally theirs. A place no man can take from them through folly or through force. It is their fortress. May they never need it, but if they do, may it give them the strength of mountains." Eleanor traced the faded script with her finger. Her great-great-grandmother's words were not a lament for the past, but a blueprint for the future. She had needed the fortress. It had weathered the siege and its walls had held. And now, from behind its strong protective embrace, she was finally ready to build a new world on her own terms. The silence in the manor was no longer the sound of absence, but the sound of profound and powerful peace. The story of Eleanor Sterling isn't just about a marriage ending. It's a powerful reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the one with the most strength, and that our own history can hold the keys to our future. Betrayal can break you, or it can forge you into something stronger. Eleanor took the ruins of her husband's lies, and from them she rebuilt her own kingdom. What would you have done in her position? How would you have used such a powerful secret? If this story of resilience, justice, and ultimate empowerment moved you, please take a moment to hit the like button below. Share this video with someone who loves a story where the underdog doesn't just win, they rewrite the entire game. And most importantly, please subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of drama, intrigue, and incredible twists of fate. Your support allows us to keep finding and sharing these amazing tales. Thank you for listening.